Hello and welcome to the April 2024 session of Arizona Community Grand Rounds. Pleased that you've joined us today, and if you're joining us through the recording, we're pleased that you're watching the recording of this as well. I'm very fortunate today to have a special guest for a conversation on human flourishing. And I'll introduce our guest in just a second, Dr. Teri Pipe. But before doing that, first just let folks know my name is Mark Carroll, and honored to serve as the Medicaid Segment Chief Medical Officer for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Arizona. And these rounds are a collaboration between the NARBA Institute and Blue Cross Blue Shield of Arizona. And we're so fortunate to have the partnership of so many from those organizations, as well as community members and partners across the state. Today's session will focus on human flourishing. The session will be recorded, and Jennifer Pierce, who is our expert telemedicine manager facilitator behind the scenes today, will post a link in the chat for where you can go to see previous recordings of Arizona Community Grand Rounds, as well as this session, which should be posted by the end of the week, and we'll put that link in the chat. Stick around, please, throughout the session as much as you can, but if you stay through the end, there'll be a QR code and a way to learn about taking a brief survey that will get you connected to CME or CEUs if you're interested in that. We'll have a little bit of information about sessions coming up in the future. So with that, I would like to begin today's session by introducing our guest, Dr. Teri Pipe. Teri is a colleague and friend that I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to chat with today about a great and rich topic. Her background is super impressive. For folks who may know Dr. Pipe, I will not do it justice in briefly noting current and a few of her roles, and maybe we can talk a little bit about her career and the course of her career. But currently, Dr. Pipe serves as the Richard E. Sinaiko Professor in Healthcare Leadership in the School of Nursing at the University of Wisconsin in Washington. She's also core faculty in the Center for Healthy Minds at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, previous to that, Dr. Pipe had numerous roles and was based in Arizona, which is where I got to meet you, Teri, so fortunate for that. And those roles included the Chief Wellbeing Officer at Arizona State University, the Dean, she is now the Dean Emerita of the ASU, Arizona State University College of Nursing and Health Innovation. Dr. Pipe has been selected as a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Executive Nurse Fellow. She has held leadership roles and healthcare delivery roles in a number of organizations, including Mayo Clinic in Arizona, has an extremely rich educational, teaching, and service background, and lists in her bio core values of humility, compassion, and generosity, which is something, Dr. Pipe, that I have found, and I think many who have worked with you and come to know you in Arizona is something that you certainly embody. And before we turn to the conversation, the next slide, please, Jen. There are no financial disclosures from either Dr. Pipe or myself today that relate to these rounds. So, Dr. Pipe, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here and feel like I'm a little bit in Arizona, even though I'm not physically.
Well, we appreciate you being here virtually and all the years of expertise. And you noted to me before we went live that there's been some snow recently out your window there in Wisconsin.
Yes. We have a springtime snowstorm. It was a little later than April Fool's, but not very much.
So right now I'm sitting in Flagstaff, northern Arizona, where there was a day before April Fool's snowstorm, which tends to do. Well, perhaps a question on many of our participant or listeners' minds who may not be familiar with the topic is human flourishing and the concept of flourishing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So you may be wanting a definition of flourishing, and I'm not going to give you one because it's a work in progress. And I think if we all consider our own definitions of what it means to flourish, you'll see that why why sort of resist a definition. Beyond the personal subjective experience of flourishing, there's also emerging evidence and research that's happening to help us understand really what is flourishing. I will tell you a couple of things that it isn't. It doesn't mean being perfect. It doesn't mean being completely physically healthy or completely mentally healthy. It means that we're on a journey and that it's a work in progress. It's not a destination. Flourishing doesn't ever end. And some would say it doesn't ever begin either, that there's just sort of this constant journeyness to it. And it's certainly a verb more than a noun. I will say that there are some frameworks that are emerging that are interesting to look at. The US Surgeon General's framework for well-being is really interesting, looking at well-being in the workplace, and then also clinician well-being. So if you're interested, more in a national level take on that, I think I would really point you to that work. At the Center for Healthy Minds, where I have a joint appointment now at University of Wisconsin-Madison, there's a framework to think about flourishing and to think about well-being in 4 different areas. And the first one is awareness. The second one is connection, insight, and purpose. So if that sort of helps us come around concepts, that might give a little bit more clarity to the concept. What do you think?
Well, let's chat about that, because I'm really interested in exploring some of the terms. I'd like to come back to those 4 organizing principles or guiding considerations, perhaps, of the framework you just described. But I did a Google search on the word flourishing, and I guess these days one should say a Chat GPT search. Someone told me this morning in another meeting, or different searches. But the word flourishing has been around for a long time in different languages and traditions, and I hope we can talk about that. But even in English, when you look at the use of the term going back to the early 1800s, it was used quite a lot in philosophy literature and other types of literature. Then sort of had a decrease to a relative underutilization and absence in the mid 20th century, and perhaps a resurgence now. Do you think that's the case, or am I overreading that?
No, I think that would characterize it really well. I think there's a lot of curiosity about flourishing and what does it mean. And maybe we can talk about this too, is when we understand flourishing, it's often at first through the individual lens. But it doesn't take very long to understand that we can't flourish without each other as humans, but we also can't flourish without a healthy planet. And so thinking about flourishing very at the micro level, but also at the larger macro levels as well, and systems level.
It's beautifully said. Flourishing is, in English, this word with this beautiful history. And in essence, it means to flower, to blossom. It's this sense of becoming. Is that, do you see it that way?
Absolutely, yes. And again, that there's not an arrival, that it's constantly in progress.
Some folks may be familiar with various, maybe distant parts of people's educational past with flourishing and think, is this Aristotle? Is this Buddhism? Does it come from a particular tradition, or is it more than that?
I can't speak to that. I don't know the answer for that. I know more at the contemporary use, I guess.
Well, that's actually the most important. Could you speak a little bit more in those 4 categories?
Sure.
Awareness was the first, is that correct?
Yeah, awareness. So really coming at life, the lived experience of being human with some sort of knowledge, awareness of being. We might call this mindfulness, but it's really a broader statement than that. It's this showing up for our life in a way that is awake and aware. Often it helps to, if we can do this, to be without judgment and to be open about the reality that presents to us. Not meaning that we don't, want to make things better or improve, or, it doesn't mean that. It just means being aware and awake to what is. And I'll just share with you as a clinician, we're really good at this. And it's a practice that we can all get better at. But I would just, ask the people in the audience who are with patients or with students, when you think about how you show up with awareness and you take everything that you can in about a patient or about a student, really using your senses, using the history, the physical, everything that you have, including yourself, is the instrument. And when you bring that kind of awareness to the clinical encounter, the depth of care and concern, the rightness of your diagnosis, the correctness of your care, can really be influenced by how much awareness you bring. So, we've all had the converse where we don't show up with full awareness, we miss a thing or two, or we make a mistake about what we've seen or heard or sensed. And that can be problematic. So in the clinical realm, it's really important to bring that awareness, I think, to bear. And then thinking about connection. So beyond the self, we can certainly connect with the self and our own sources of strength and stability and serenity, but also thinking about how do we connect with other humans? How do we connect with the planet? How do we connect with animals? How do we connect with ideas? We're a curious species. So how do we connect? Really important. Insight. So after the awareness and the connection, taking that moment or hour or year to really come up with, how do I interpret this? What is my insight about it? Giving yourself the time to have that dawning of insight and understanding. And then finally, purpose. And I should mention, this is not linear, that you can access any of these at any point. But purpose, really important, I think, especially as we're thinking about clinician well-being and flourishing, that we tap into what is our mission and our purpose, and also understanding that this may change over time. I deal with a lot of undergraduates these days, and they feel a lot of pressure, and I'm generalizing, but they feel a lot of pressure to find their purpose or to be able to name their purpose. And it's okay if it's a moving idea or a moving purpose, and it doesn't have to be just one thing or a word. It can be a lot of things. So when I say purpose, it's more about how do you integrate meaning into how you're living your day-to-day life.
Well, that's so nicely expressed. I appreciate that there's that interaction between these different components. What advice do you have for folks, or tips or tools, skills that we can learn to get us to pause, as well as to get us to not be too wrapped up in what is my purpose? Because I know I can fall into that. So I can stumble into that pothole of what is my purpose, and am I actually fulfilling that?
Well, for those who know me, this might sound really familiar. And that is that often the doorway to all of those things is being aware of what's happening in this present moment. And so, really cultivating that skill of being able to really reside in this moment and knowing that the past is the past, and you can honor that, you can cherish it, you can not want it anymore, but it is the past, and the future likewise is not here yet. So really no need to worry about it, no need to grasp after it. It will come, hopefully. It'll arrive in its own time. And so time after time reminding ourselves that we can be in this moment, and in this moment we're really okay. I mean, most of us have the safety not all the time, but we're fortunate, most of us, to be safe. And so helping ourselves remember that in this moment, I'm okay. I'm enough. I matter. I can be present with myself, and that's a safe place. And if it isn't, there's help, there's help to make that place safer. So that is one skill, is to just keep reminding yourself to come into the present moment. And related to that, and I'll give one more example and then we can go on. But in these days, we are so good at multitasking, and probably a lot of you who are listening are doing right now. I mean, I have data to show that it's probably true that you're trying to do other things right now, and that really our minds aren't meant to multitask, that it's very difficult really to grasp two things or three or five at once. Some people do it. And I think that we're at a moment in history where we've made it really like an honor to be able to multitask. Like, this is something that we strive for. We're kind of proud of the ability to do all these things at once. But my challenge is, and it's a challenge to myself too, is, can you drop it? Can you focus on only one thing at a time? Really? And I think that is going to be the next challenge for our species, is can we use our cognition and our essence and our focus and our attention, which is our greatest gift, and we use that in a way that is intentional and not fragmented, not interrupted. Because we have some pretty big problems to solve. And if we can't bring ourselves to learn to focus, we won't be able to solve those problems as well as we could if we could bring everything to bear.
I'd like to pursue that. That's richly expressed. I imagine so many folks have a struggle similar to what I do, which is, my awareness in the moment is great when I remember to be aware in the moment. I know that you've helped people with little reminders and remembrances to stay in moment. Any that you might share right now?
So this is really personalized, and I think I'll just give you some examples from classes I've taught for the students have taught me, which always happens. One time I was teaching a mindfulness course for people who had low back pain, so low back pain patients who are really suffering. And one of them was a cowgirl, and she was suffering with low back pain from injuries, working with livestock. And the way that she described how she would work with her attention, because all of our attention wanders. That is just what it does. It's not a problem. It's not a deficit. It's just what we do, what our brains do, because they're healthy. So when she would catch her mind wandering and she wanted to bring it back to whatever the object was of attention, she would think about it as roping a cow. She would be like, I use my lasso, however you say it. And that's what I grab my attention with, and I bring it back, maybe to your breath, maybe to your body, maybe to, a meal that you're eating, a conversation you're having, whatever it is. That was her mental image of, I take my lasso and I rope it and I bring it back, which I thought was great. I mean, that's, highly personal, relevant, and she can remember that. She can remember to do it. Other ways, I think maybe it's not as important how to remember as it is how to gently bring yourself back. Right? So as much as we have the capacity for our mind to wander, we also notice when we've wandered, which is good, and something that you can become much better at with practice. So as you're practicing and you're getting better and you're noticing when your mind is wandering, really important the way that you bring your focus back, which is not scolding and hostile and, oh my gosh, there's a huge problem because my mind has just wandered, but rather instead, oh my gosh, there it went again. There she went again. She's thinking of something else. Maybe labeling that, and then just gently, really gently bringing your attention back. So it's not it's not this inner hostility or inner need for perfection, more it's a gentle coaxing back, escorting back the attention to the place where we want it to be. And this is really important, like for learners, for people who are studying for exams, or they're trying to take in new information, or even just trying to read a book for recreation, or watch something, or interact with art or music. When you find that your mind has wandered, just gently guiding it back, over and over and over again, as many times as you need to, so that you can fully engage with what you're trying to take in.
I wish sometimes that we might, and I know that's what you're doing, and part of the the efforts that you participate in and you've been doing in teaching over the years, but even when we raise our kids as a parent, how often did I try to help them learn early on, especially when they entered into adolescence, that mind doesn't have to feel like a separator, and that the experience that so many have is so common. That people who have the privilege really of having uh, an awake consciousness, and not everyone has that same opportunity, born into the world from other health challenges, just as human beings. They We sometimes just assume that what's happening to me is just happening to me, and so I have having the space to smile at oneself, to lasso oneself back, or whatever the right image or metaphor is, has been helpful for me. But it's taken a lot of years, and I still stumble. The mind still goes, and then the wagging finger internally wags at me like, "There you go again." Um, but I guess what you're saying is it's okay, and we should forgive ourselves, and stop wagging the finger at ourselves.
Completely. I mean, that's mind wandering is the mark that your brain is working, right? And sometimes I do want to note that sometimes daydreaming and mind wandering is really fruitful. It's really creative place, and bringing some gentle awareness to that maybe right now I do just need to let my mind wander, and that would be just fine. Sometimes we need that creative space. Also, something that you just said, maybe want to pause and acknowledge that when we think about these ideas, it is often from a place of privilege and from safety, and not everyone has that. Um, and I will share with you that a really meaningful presentation that I heard recently was from an international researcher who does work with refugees. It's Mate Bernstein, and he was talking about his work teaching mindfulness to refugees. And these are people who have had many of them, if not most of them, have had really dire threats to their physical safety, and many have suffered injury and illness and worse trauma, and they face an uncertain future. And so, in some ways, teaching them to be present to the moment, he had to really explore that. Was that ethical? Was it something that was helpful, or what? And that was part of the work that he was doing. And he related to us that, um, he asked sort of straight on, what benefits does mindfulness have for you as a refugee, for someone who has been in danger and probably is currently in danger? And the answer was, for many people, mindfulness is just sort of icing on the cake. It's something that you do as a luxury. But for me, it is absolutely necessary for my survival. Because if I am not able to put myself in this moment, if I'm caught in the past or too fearful of the future, um, I won't be able to live my life. And so having the practice of being awake and aware to the moment actually is a survival skill. which was really helpful for me to understand that this, I acknowledge that I am in a privileged existence. Um, and so knowing that awareness and compassion and connection, insight and purpose, all of that also has a place for people who are experiencing danger and threat and trauma. It's very maybe it's the connection part, helps me feel connected in that way.
The connecting, how do you see that in terms of flourishing and in this evolving notion of your, or individual purpose? Could you speak a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I'll put this in the context of a course that I was really happy to be able to co-teach last fall, which was the Art and Science of Human Flourishing. And it was for first-time college students. So these are pretty much, 18 to 20-year-olds, maybe a little younger, maybe a little older, but pretty much in that developmental category. And when we talked about human flourishing, it was, we did start with the individual level, but it became very clear to them early on that that's not sufficient and that flourishing can't occur only at the individual level, that we need to drive connection. And so in the classroom and the discussion sections and so forth, it was really lovely to see the way that they would connect with each other around these concepts and then connect in the larger group. So, it can be, and the connection can be anything from one person to one person, or it can be in a group or in a work culture, in an organizational culture, in a system. And we definitely learned in the pandemic that even loose connections, the people that we bump into every day that we might not even know, those loose connections are really important for our well-being and our flourishing. So yeah, I think building connection within oneself, but then also beyond the self. And then also just thinking more globally about how do we intentionally make connection about the ways that we behave that impact others around the world, or vice versa. It can be anything from our supply chain to the food we eat to, just about anything involved with life. If we look at it carefully, we'll see that we are so connected to other people.
Is flourishing, from your perspective, either at the individual or system, and we should chat a little bit about systems here and how systems can encourage, facilitate, and promote connections as well as individual sense of flourishing. How much does that depend on outside, or how much agency do we all have individually? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, certainly a both and there, but so I'll just start talking about work cultures. So thinking about health systems, which is what I'm most familiar with, or educational systems, and thinking about, certainly there are systems in place to help us flourish. However, there are also aspects of the system that are not built for our flourishing whatsoever. And so as people working in the system, we are the culture, right? And so having agency about if there are things that need to be changed, then speaking up and identifying those things, working with others to change them, really doing so with care and concern. How we do the work really matters. And so how we show up for each other in our work or learning spaces and our family spaces and community as well. But, when we show up with kindness and compassion and care, then we create that culture. And that may sound very oversimplified. But if we don't do it that way, we'll never get to where I think that we can be, which is to have work cultures and learning cultures and societal cultures that are pro-social and in service of flourishing. and the people who are able to speak up and to be advocates, really, this is my view, my editorial view, is that we have the responsibility to do so. If we're living with that kind of platform, then it's really important for us to be able to speak to that and to work toward it. And in really thinking about what are the systematic ways that we can support flourishing, and understanding that flourishing does not look the same for everyone. And the people whose voices aren't here are also really important to listen to when it comes time to thinking about systems and cultures. So really inviting a number of different viewpoints to be considered when we think about how do we change our cultures to make them more pro-social and more, and when I say pro-social, I mean positive and, not negating the problems that we have, but really building on the strengths that we can surface and building stronger, more vibrant cultures.
Or we so need some of these refocused attentions, perhaps, or reminders, even collectively now. I suspect you'd agree, given polarized conversation that we're exposed to in the media, polarized conversation that some of us actively or inadvertently contribute to. One can still flourish in those type of situations and impact culture. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah, we must.
Do you have a way as a leader in whether in your various leadership roles, whether when you at ASU, the well-being officer, gosh, that's a big task for ASU, and now the role that you have at the university. Do you have just some key conceptual frames that you use for yourself? Maybe you've already referenced them, and how to support someone else's notion of flourishing, and yet how to find ourselves towards some common agreement of what we may mean by flourishing, even if we use different words.
Yeah. So for me, I think a key leadership competency is listening, and listening with so much more than just the ears and the auditory work that goes on, but listening with the heart and listening to things that aren't easy to listen to, and not rushing to action. Which, especially when I look back and think of myself as a new leader, that's such a temptation, is to jump right to action. And often when we jump too fast, it's not the right direction. So listening and having some time for those decisions that allow time to be had, and then getting as close to the work, as close to the experience as you can. And so understanding from the people who are closest to the issue or the problem or the thing that's going right, getting their perspectives is really critical. So listening, but also inviting in as many perspectives as you can, practically, and thinking about who isn't here. You can see who is here, and you can identify the voices that are here, but who isn't? And if you don't have that voice, who could be a proxy for it? Like, who could you ask that would help understand from that point of view? I think that those are critical for me anyway. Over the years, that has been a critical thing to understand. And then, with humility, thinking you will never have a complete 360-degree understanding that is perfect. And so sometimes decisions have to be made with incomplete information, given the time that you have. Does that answer? I don't know if that really answers your question.
No, I think it does. Sometimes some of these questions are just hard to have perfect answers, but inculcating, nurturing leadership skills that it sounds like you remind yourself to listen. When I once assumed a certain leadership position in an organization, the outgoing leader left an index card for me, And he said, this is my many years of learning. And on it were only just a couple of things. And it was taped above the desk. We could use that all on our metaphorical desks, just carry it around. But the first one was ask. It was 3 letters. And what I interpret from that, he never explained to me. But it was for me to find. It was ask more than you tell, and listen for things that you may be surprised to learn. A colleague of mine said today in a coffee break this morning during some planning session for actually the new College of Medicine at Northern Arizona University, but said it's important to teach how to learn. And it just struck me as such a lifelong lesson for us. Would you agree?
Absolutely. No, I think one of the most joyful capacities really that we have is curiosity. And yes, this willingness to learn and to not have the answers, which is, often in our age of living, it's really it's difficult to say I don't know, or I haven't thought about that yet, or I don't have access to that information right now, whatever, however you want to say it. But remaining curious and remaining willing to learn new things, I think, will be increasingly important as our society goes on. I just think there's so much more to know, right? I mean, even just looking at information, there's so much more to know, but also not letting go of the wisdom. Knowledge and wisdom are two related but different capacities. And I think that curiosity can lead you to knowledge, but if you also have the luxury of time, then curiosity can also help open these doors for wisdom.
I read this beautiful expression by Dr. Teri Pipe. I think I'm pronouncing that name correctly. It was from multiple years ago, and I don't remember the citation, but Dr. Pipe was quoted as saying, and this was in the setting of healthcare and direct patient care, patients don't care about what we know until they know that we care. What's your experience been like in nursing and in working in interdisciplinary environments of helping people transmit that notion of caring, but also really step into what a broader sense of caring is?
Yeah. So this could also just be a whole long conversation, but lately I've been thinking and talking with other people, learning a lot about compassion. So I'm just going to, instead of care, I'll just kind of
Please
rename it compassion.
Take any direction. And for listeners, we decided that we didn't have any agenda or script. Dr. Pipe was so kind to just allow this conversation to unfold. So please, any direction.
So, and I would really be curious what your audience thinks so we hear a lot these days about compassion fatigue and burnout. And so thinking with that sort of as a backdrop, that actually there's work being done to look at the difference in the brain activity between empathy and compassion. And so I'll just tell you my little definitions of this. So empathy is sort of understanding, trying to walk in someone else's shoes. So really wanting to experience what they're experiencing. Compassion is a little bit different than that. Compassion is extending the person who's going through the rough spot care and concern and a wish for their well-being. It doesn't mean that you are walking in their shoes. It means that you're in the same place with them, that you're walking alongside them, so to speak. And that sounds like a very nuanced difference. But when we look at folks that are exhausted and burnout, often it's from being so empathetic that they've put themselves in the other person's shoes so much that they're depleted. And actually the hormonal axis that gets, activated is really cortisol when you're over empathetic. When you're working more with compassion, when you have integrity of your own self, understanding that that other is going through something, but they are the other, and that you wish them well, you wish them, you might be loving them, you might be, really extending your well wishes, you're working for them to be well, but you have that sense of personal boundary. That is a much healthier place to be. And it is actually very self-sustaining. So that when we use compassion actively, working towards someone else's well-being, actively pursuing that with regard for our own boundaries, that can be just a very sustainable way for us to be vibrant in the workforce. And as we work across professions, across disciplines, helping ourselves to tell the narratives, to tell the stories of times when we were compassionate with others, with ourselves, that just builds this sort of virtuous cycle of then, energizing a more flourishing environment for ourselves. And so really, I think being careful to certainly practice compassion, and practicing self-compassion is a beautiful place to start. Practicing that, and also acknowledging that a patient or a student or a colleague, they have their own situation, which is theirs. And that by, if we invade that, we're actually taking away from their experience. I was taught that by a clergy person. Many years ago. I found it so helpful, and I try to remind myself of it repeatedly, is that, we each have our own life, and that has its own lessons in it. So I feel like I've just gone on, and I don't know if it really,
No,
again,
it's super
addressed
helpful.
the question, but I think as much as we can, having that dialogue around the difference between empathy and compassion is really fruitful. And I'd love to know your thoughts around that.
I continue to try to learn and understand that for myself, honestly. There's that notion that those who are parents or grandparents or aunts or uncles, younger folks we love, if there's been injury or something, it's that, ooh, it's to that core feeling. Um, and that is more of an empathic response. I used to use the term compassion for that, but then I thought we could get too lost in terms of what we really want to explore are what's sitting behind, as you so nicely did, and what does it mean to care for someone else? And what do you think that causes us to interrogate and think about self and other and that interdependency? Uh, would you agree with that? Uh, and how have you helped folks and organizations explore that interdependency, if I may use that term?
Mhm. Well, I think so. It involves so many skill sets, and one of the first, I think, is to know yourself. Like, how do you know who you are, so that you can have the boundary for, this is who I am versus this is who, my patient is or my colleague is. And that, of course, is a lifelong work. It's, knowing the self is very vitally important. And there's lots of ways to do that. There's journaling and meditation and conversation and interacting with nature. And there's all kinds of ways to know the self. And then honoring the other, that the other has their own life and their own experience to bear. And if we try, saving them, and I'm using that in sort of a quotation mark way, is we get into their business of their life. And certainly I think it's important to help people, and it's important to bring our professional knowledge base to bear when we're working with a patient or being an educator. But it is true that is the other person's life to live. And so navigating that really carefully between helping versus over caring, overdoing it, because then we rob them of their agency and their power. So I think it's always a work in progress, and there's probably not a recipe way to do it, because every person, every other is also different. So it's something kind of a really beautiful journey to figure out, how do we do this. And for students, I think this is one of the wonderful, rewarding things of working with health profession students, is to watch them do this. How do they, first of all, learn about themselves? How do they then get out of themselves to help another? And then how do they navigate that, working with the patient without overreaching, without controlling? That makes sense?
Yeah, it does. Dr. Steve Swenson, I think you know Steve, he joined a conversation a month ago with Dr. Teresa Birch on kindness and leading with kindness, which has such a synergistic feel to the conversation we're having now. And yet there are some differences, but he talked about certain types of values that organizations can embrace, that um, that that bring kindness into practice versus as a concept or as a value or as a something we aspire to. Uh, what are your thoughts about that overlap with that term, kindness? And have you found similarly, when you've been working with leadership, that there are those concrete ways that you've already expressed? How receptive are they to messages around flourishing and bringing that into a work environment that is often fast-paced and requires multitasking, even though we all know that that is not very effective?
So sometimes there's resistance, to the idea. And I think even having the conversation that flourishing is possible can be eye-opening. Flourishing isn't often even a word that we consider when we're thinking about healthcare organizations. So just bringing it up on the marquee to say, here's a possibility, sometimes is all the invitation that's needed then, for a great work to happen. But certainly there are places or, work environments that have a bit of resistance to that. I've sort of befriended that resistance and skepticism. I think it's important, because then you understand where the work actually needs to happen. Having said that, I think that a lot of workplaces, a lot of health systems are very ready for this work to happen. It doesn't mean that it is a very uphill battle in some spots, and I don't think that we can or should gloss over that. I think that building or rebuilding a culture is hard work, and it takes time. But to my way of thinking, if you're not bringing in compassion and kindness and awareness, inside some of the other things that we've been talking about, we're just going to end up with the same structures or worse. And we can't afford to do that anymore.
Do you see this as an opportune time, even though the past 4 years of pandemic have been super challenging and tragic for so many and continue to be challenging? But is there opportunity inside some of that sadness and weight?
I do, I think that we have to search for that and make a meaning out of it. I think, again, this is just sort of my personal view, is the world needs us to do this work. And if we don't show up with ourselves flourishing as individuals, it's going to be very hard to do that work together. So as much as we can, taking ownership of our own individual pathways for flourishing, and then supporting others in terms of our colleagues, near and far, and our organizations. the world has never needed it more than it needs it now. And I just feel a sense of urgency about that, particularly when I look at the workforce challenges and just the numbers of people, really good people, leaving the field or not going into this work. And, as healthcare professionals, most of us came into this knowing there would be sacrifice and actually inspired because of that, right? We knew it would be hard physical work, hard mental work, hard heart work, all of it. And that's why we did it. That's why we're here, and it's why we're still here. And I think in order to draw new people to prepare the future workforce, to give them models of people of leaders who are flourishing is going to be really important, because not very many people are signing up for these leadership roles anymore because we've worn them out. We've just shown them that it's an impossible task. And I think we need to backpedal that and sort of show that there are ways that we can make work and life more compatible and kinder and more integrated. And, learning across the generations and across the tenures of work. Some people come into this with very little experience, but a lot of wisdom. And so, being able to learn from our colleagues who might be newer at it, and vice versa, I think incredibly important. So yes, I see it as an opportunity, not at all wanting to negate the loss and hurt that has gone before it. But if we, it's sort of like we owe it to the people who were hurt or lost, is that if we don't make the most of this moment, then that's a real shame.
There is so much wisdom in the world, is there not? Sometimes it's easy for us to go to that judging space, and then lasso that, because that's our own perspective, judging, but perhaps it's more interpreting. Maybe if we reframed it in the four conceptual pillars that you talked about for your program, how we gather insight is how we interpret, and judgments are interpretations, and those can change. So there's a lot of daily wisdom that I found when I listen for it. It's all around me, and sometimes in fairly informal comments that people I don't know make in the grocery store or somewhere else. Would you agree that that's a good place for us to be, to find wisdom, not always from, definitely from traditions and from people's faiths and people's belief systems, but also from those around us?
Absolutely. And sometimes they come from the most unexpected ways, as you're saying. I just saw a bulletin board. I don't know the company that this is for. I don't know, but it was a big billboard and it just said, "Be bold." It's like, yeah, be bold. So, I think, but you could walk right by that conversation in the grocery store if you weren't awake and aware. So just bringing that awareness is of course, the first step. And I think it's also important to note that awareness is also really required to experience joy and happiness and all of the really good things that the world has to offer us. But we do have to be open and awake to it. And often, given sort of the environments that we work in, we've numbed down so much of our experience. It's a natural tendency, of course, is to sort of escape the bad stuff. But if we numb ourselves to the bad stuff, we also are cutting off all of that good stuff. So it's about the everything. Flourishing doesn't mean just in the happy space. It means showing up for life when it's all of it, the full on everything.
Do you have a practice for yourself, either the beginning or the end of day, that you'd be comfortable sharing? I'll share with you that it grounds me just as a person to begin the day in a certain way, if I can have a few minutes, and end the day. And I end the day with with identifying and looking for gratitude, even for some of the most simple things that I might not have noticed, that tend to help me put a smile on my face, even if it's been a rough day. Do you have a practice like that?
I do, and it's pretty non-negotiable. So I have a meditation practice that I do every morning, and then like you said, gratitude at night, just looking over the day, and it can be really silly things, but it often involves my dogs. But just the little moments in life that really make life worth living. But in the beginning of the day, I really do take the time every single day to remember who I am and what strengthens me, and get ready for whoever comes along in my day. And I found that to be so meaningful that I can't and won't give it up. And on days when I can't even say a day that I don't do it, but a day that it gets shortened, I can really tell the difference in my focus and energy, moving forward. And I don't say that, please don't anybody hear me that I'm prescribing that for anybody else. That's just a survival technique that I've learned in my own flourishing, is that if I can tune myself at the beginning of the day, then that's a good thing. But it doesn't mean that you have to. You'll all find your own way.
There are different ways of tuning. Perhaps I like that metaphor to the music of one's day, one's own purpose, flourishing. And sometimes purpose is today is it is walking and feeding and caring for the pet that offers so much in return. Or maybe it's just noticing light through the limbs of a tree. But it also can involve noticing the challenge and the suffering that others are going through, and trying to hold a little space for other folks inside that. Well, we have reached the end of the hour, and I'm so grateful for that'll be one of my gratitude things today, Teri, for sure. The opportunity to speak with you and to explore a topic which has such depth to it, of course, really across human tradition, and so important for us now, the topic of flourishing. Dr. Teri Pipe, thank you so much, not just for joining today, but for the work that you've done, work that you're doing right now, your teaching, your compassion, the courage that you bring to conversation. I know that for folks who are watching from Arizona, you have made a difference, and you've altered your trajectory of many conversations and activities in the state. For that, we thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for having me. And please, from my heart to yours, I just really wish you well on your journey, collectively and individually. Thank you so much for this time together.
Thank you. Thank you, Teri. Well, that concludes today's session of Arizona Community Grand Rounds. If you are interested in receiving some CME or CEUs, or just want to give us some feedback, there's a QR code there. If you've signed up, you'll get an email from us. If you have any thoughts, feedback for me or for Dr. Pipe, I'm sure would be welcome to receive them. Ways that we can support flourishing for you and your organizations. Coming up on May 1st, next month, Arizona Community Grand Rounds will have a session looking at the Community Cares Platform in Arizona, that connection to services that folks need in the community. But on behalf of the facilitators of Arizona Community Grand Rounds, everyone behind the scenes who makes this happen, thank you so much. And thanks you all for joining us. Dr. Pipe, looking forward to chatting with you soon. Thank you.